I would say in terms of real-time information, I was shocked how often the phone was ringing. I think Andrew got over 10 calls during the first round alone, despite the fact that the infrastructure of the Chiefs trade was already in place, contingent upon the player being there. I mean, there are a lot of trade calls that come up and don't get answered, or not don't get answered, the call is answered, but the trades don't end up happening.
Trade.
So I was.
And I mean, I would be sweating bullets just to make sure he wasn't going to take an offensive lineman after he said he was going to make the deal. You know, like there is a huge level of trust that general managers have to have between each other if they're going to make a move like that, especially early in the draft, right?
Browns fans, we finally have a rare inside look at what really happened during round 1 of the 2026 NFL Draft, because Jori Epstein was literally in the Cleveland Browns war room while it was all going down, and what she revealed changes everything. Non-stop phone calls, last-second trade pressure, and Andrew Berry making moves in real time that most fans never even realize are happening. This wasn't just a draft, this was controlled chaos, and now we finally know how the Browns played it perfectly. Here's the part nobody is talking about. The Browns were getting calls non-stop. Jori said Andrew Berry got over 10 calls in the first round alone, even though the framework of the Chiefs trade was already sitting there, waiting on the right player to be available. That matters, because people kept saying this was not a strong draft, and nobody would want to move up. But inside that room, the phone told a different story. Teams were interested, teams were calling, teams were trying to move. The public narrative and the actual league activity were not the same thing.
Okay, if Kansas City's guaranteed us they're not taking a tackle, and Washington, who's picking 7, just extended Laramie Tunsil, and the Saints picking 8, just drafted Kelvin Banks in the first round next year, we feel good at 9, but once you get down to 11 or 12, there's probably going to be some tackles gone.
And the technology side was wild, too. Every time a pick came in, Cleveland's system updated within seconds. Players disappeared from the board. Team needs changed. Trade proposals became irrelevant. The last 15 picks, the next 5 picks, positional needs, remaining targets, everything was shifting in real time. That is not old school guesswork anymore. That is high-tech draft room giving the front office every possible angle before they make a decision. So when Berry moved, he was not just moving off vibes. He had the whole board in front of him. This is where it gets dangerous, because the Browns had multiple trade options, but the Chiefs' deal only made sense if Kansas City was not taking the players Cleveland wanted. Jori said the Browns wanted confirmation that the Chiefs were not coming up for offensive tackle or receiver. They knew Kansas City was looking defense, and that gave Cleveland enough comfort to move from 6 to 9. That is the difference between a smart trade down and a reckless trade down. You can't just collect picks and pray. You have to know your player is still likely to be there.
It was not a Jerry Jones ownership is running the draft. I think that ownership was watching what Andrew and his staff, whether that's a Chris Cooper, whether that's Ken Kovash, whether that's Adam Al-Kayal, all of them have their different roles in this. They were the ones making the calls about the trades. They were the ones who had set the draft board.
And that is why Carnell Tate going off the board actually helped Cleveland. When Tate was picked, J.W. Johnson basically reacted like, that helps us, right? Because it meant one more player outside Cleveland's main target zone was gone, and the path to Spencer Fano stayed open. The Browns did not need the exact defensive player Kansas City wanted. They just needed to know the Chiefs were not jumping them for Fano or the receiver group they valued. That trust between Berry and Brett Veach mattered. Relationships matter on draft night. Here's the part nobody is talking about. The trade was not truly final until the Browns were on the clock. The framework was there before the draft, but nothing is locked until the moment comes. Berry is on the phone with Brett Veach. Chris Cooper is calling the league to make sure the trade is official. Everybody is moving at once, and while fans are watching the TV broadcast like it is one simple decision, the room is managing calls, scenarios, board movement, and risk in real time. That is pressure.
They're on the clock and they're like celebrating the fact that they're going to take Spencer Fano, and the phone rings again with one last chance. And so I think that's probably more typical than we think, but it was really fun to see because we don't often hear about the trades that happened. And then
Then Cleveland gets to 9, and even then the phone rings again. Jori said the Browns did have trade offers after moving down, but they turned them down. That is another key detail. They were not just addicted to moving back, they knew when to stop, and that is where young front offices usually make a mistake. They keep chasing extra value until they lose the player they wanted in the first place. Cleveland had already won the value play. At 9, they took Spencer Fano and stopped playing games. That is how you know they really valued Fano. They were celebrating the chance to take him, and the phone still rang with one last opportunity, but the Browns said no. Why? Because after Fano, the offensive tackle run started. If they had moved down again, they may have ended up in a different tier, and that's the whole point of draft discipline. Trade down once if you can still get your guy. Trade down again only if the board allows it. Cleveland understood the cliff was coming and decided not to get too cute.
4 of them on your team, is that going to help you catch the ball from your quarterback, things like that? And so I think that the Browns understood, first of all, where was where were the positions that were strongest in this draft? And offensive tackle was one.
This is where it gets dangerous for the rest of the AFC North, because Fano was not just a safe pick, he was their top tackle. Cleveland believed he could be the guy to help fix the offensive line, and they understood that whoever plays quarterback needs a healthier ecosystem. That phrase matters, a healthier ecosystem. Not just another quarterback, not just another debate about Shedeur Sanders, Deshaun Watson, Dylan Gabriel, or Taylor Green. The Browns were focused on building the world around the quarterback so the offense can actually function. And Jori made a great point about Ty Simpson. People are trying to turn that into this massive would they have taken him conversation, but the reality is simpler. The Browns knew a week before that the Rams liked Ty Simpson. He went 11 picks before Cleveland's next pick. The Browns had chances at 6 and 9 and did not take him, so acting like they were 1 second away from taking him at 24 is probably too much. Could they have evaluated him? Of course. Teams should always evaluate quarterbacks, but were they close to taking him early? The evidence says no. Here's the part nobody is talking about. Looking at quarterbacks does not mean you hate the quarterbacks already in the building. It means you understand the value of the position. If you don't have a recent, consistent, high-level answer at quarterback, you should always look. That does not mean you force it. It means you assign value. The Rams decided Ty Simpson was worth giving up a chance at a win-now piece. The Browns decided their better move was offensive line and pass catchers. That tells you their priority. And honestly, that priority makes sense. If Cleveland had drafted Ty Simpson at 24, fans would have exploded, because then you're adding another quarterback to a room that already has confusion while still needing help around the offense. Instead, the Browns took Concepcion, then waited and still landed Denzel Boston. That is the kind of move that makes the quarterback room easier to evaluate. Now you have more protection, more weapons, and more clarity about who can actually play when given help. This is where young teams usually make a mistake. They think the quarterback alone fixes everything. He doesn't. You can ruin a young quarterback by giving him no line, no separation, no run game, and no answers. Cleveland seems to understand that now. They took Fano, they took Concepcion, they took Boston, they added McNeil Warren. They kept building. They gave themselves 4 players in 2 rounds that Jori said were in Daniel Jeremiah's top 25. 4 top 25 prospects in 2 rounds is insane. Statistically, you should be thrilled to get 1. Cleveland got 4. That is why the Concepcion pick becomes so important. Jori said Andrew Berry basically walked over and asked if she knew who they were taking at the next pick, and based on how the board was falling, it was Casey. That means this was not some debate where half the room wanted Denzel Boston at 24 and half wanted Concepcion. Casey was the guy there. They loved what he could do for the receiver room, and they loved the extra value he brings in the return game too. Not because he is only a returner, but because versatility matters. Here's the part nobody is talking about. Casey Concepcion gives Cleveland something they didn't really have enough of: a player who can separate, create yards after catch, work in motion, and stress defenses horizontally. That is huge for a quarterback. Not every play has to be a deep shot. Not every throw has to be perfect. Sometimes you need a guy who can catch a simple pass and turn it into 15 yards. That is how you make an offense feel easier, and that is why the Browns were excited about him. Then the second round comes, and Denzel Boston is still sitting there. That is where the buzz picks up, because the Browns liked Boston enough to consider moving for him, but they did not have to. He fell, and once he did, Cleveland ended up with the perfect receiver pairing. Concepcion gives you quickness and space ability. Boston gives you size, hands, and catch radius. One is the underneath creator, the other is the outside target. Together, they make the offense more complete. And then McNeil Warren is still there later in the round, and Cleveland gets thrilled again. That is another moment where the board worked in their favor. They did not force need over value. They saw a player sitting there who was too good to pass up and made the move. That is what good teams do. You fill needs, but you do not ignore a player who should not be available, especially when that player can help a defense that already has talent. This is where it gets dangerous, because the Browns may have had different grades than the rest of the league this year, and that is how you find value. Jori said for a couple years, teams felt their early round evaluations were similar because everyone had so much information, but this year, Cleveland's board clearly lined up differently than some other teams. That allowed them to land players they valued much higher than where they were picked. That is not just luck, that is conviction. And the Fano pick proves that. The Browns could have moved down again. They could have tried to squeeze every ounce of value out of the board, but they knew the tackle run was coming. They knew Fano was the guy, so they took him, and then the run happened. That is a front office understanding the board before the board punishes them. It's easy to say trade down when you're watching at home. It's harder when you know one more move could cost you your preferred tackle. Here's the part nobody is talking about. This draft also shows the Browns were not drafting emotionally. Fans wanted certain names. The media had certain narratives. There was quarterback noise, there was wide receiver noise, there were trade rumors, but the Browns stayed with their board. board. They did not chase Ty Simpson. They did not panic for Boston. They did not move too far from Fano. They did not ignore McNeil Warren. They balanced value, need, and risk. That is what real draft rooms are supposed to do. And Jori's access matters because it confirms what fans usually never get to see. We always hear the polished version after the fact. We got our guy, we liked the board, we had options. But this time, we actually got stories from inside the room. Phones ringing, calls coming in, trade frameworks, ownership reacting, very trusting relationships, databases updating in seconds, the room celebrating, then the phone ringing again. That's real texture. That's the draft behind the draft. This is where the story gets bigger than one class, because if the Browns keep stacking drafts like this, the franchise narrative changes. Last year, they started building young talent. This year, they added more. They turned 2026 capital into 10 rookies, 2 fourth-round picks in 2027, and Titus Howard. That's a lot of roster building. And when you think about how many holes they had, that matters more than one flashy pick. The whole draft was about balance. Get high-level players, but don't burn too much capital. Take multiple chances because every prospect carries risk. Don't get too cute because missing your guy is not a win. That is the exact balance Jori described. And it's why Cleveland's draft looked so strong. They played the board aggressively enough to gain value, but not so aggressively that they lost control. Now the pressure shifts to the field. Spencer Fano has to block. Concepcion has to create. Denzel Boston has to win. McNeil Warren has to make plays. The quarterback room still has to sort itself out. But for once, the Browns are not just asking the quarterback to save everything. They're building a structure around him. And that might be the most important takeaway from the entire War Room story. So now the debate is simple. Did Andrew Berry just pull off one of the smartest Browns drafts in recent memory? Or are fans getting too excited before any of these players take a snap? Because the inside intel says Cleveland was prepared, active, patient, and disciplined. They got their top tackle. They got their receiver target. They waited out Boston. They stole McNeil Warren. And they came out of 2 rounds with 4 players they may have been happy taking in the first. That is not normal. That is not casual. That is not just a lucky weekend. That is what happens when preparation meets the board falling your way. And if this class hits, people are going to look back at that Browns War Room and say this was the night Cleveland stopped acting desperate and started acting dangerous.